this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to the End Game. I'm Tom Shanahan, and my co-host is Herman Bulls, and we have two great guests, the great Gary Steele and another legend from Army West Point, Bill Rao. This is really a special segment because we're coming full circle about Army football in several ways. The timing is coincidental that Army is 9-0, ranked, and has a bye week, the week that we're recording this. So they don't have a game before they play Notre Dame November 23rd. And time the two teams have been both ranked, I believe, since 1958. Uh, and um, and back in those days, of course, Notre Dame was a national power, and Army was often playing them with national title or national ranking implications. So there's a full circle game in that sense they're also playing at Yankee Stadium. So 100th anniversary of the Four Horsemen at West Point, Notre Dame's Four Horsemen. First game at Yankee Stadium since 2010. And then we're going to just tie together some stories about college football integration, which is what the End Game is always about, and connecting how Gary Steele was the first black letterman at West Point in 1966. His head coach was Paul Dietzel. One of his assistant coach was Bill Rao, also a former West Point player. And then Paul and Bill moved on to South Carolina, where they coached the first black player, scholarship recruit in 1969, Jackie Brown. And then later in the early 70s, when West Point still had very few black cadets, Gary Steele was an assistant coach, and he landed a prominent future recruit named Herman Bulls. And Herman is here with us to discuss all that. Herman, you go first, introducing Gary and what he meant to you to go to West Point.
Well, first of all, I'd like to wish everybody a past Veterans Day because it was yesterday as we're recording this. It was a great day. And Tom, I'm going to give a shout out here, and Pops or my great coach knew her as well. My wife. We did a event at the Smithsonian yesterday where the military gallery, the entrance of it, was dedicated to my wife, Iris Bulls. And when you get down to the Smithsonian, make sure you get up there. It was a great program. We expected initially about 40 people. Over 230, 240 people showed up, and it was just a great event. And we ended up that last night here at the house. And Iris had designed a pool, I should say, in the back yard here, waterfall with a garden. And her sorority sisters came over, and Gary will appreciate this. And she's a Delta Sigma Theta, is her sorority. They came over and they did the Delta song, and it was quite an evening. We had about 65 or 70 people here at the house.
Wow.
So phenomenal Veterans Day weekend for the Bulls family. My boys, I hope they don't see this because I was so proud of them, the remarks they made about their mom. And we had people, I mean, generals, politicians. It was just humongous. The people that showed up coming from California, Oregon, Arizona, Texas, just came in for the day to honor her. So Bill, you maybe not didn't know her, but I married a lady who was in the Army. She moved in across the hall from me, and she actually worked at West Point. And Bill, for your information, she recruited over 1,000 cadets when she worked in the admissions office. So I'm old now and I can hijack the telephone when I want to, the microphone, and I did to say that. So other than that, welcome. And Tom, you asked me to talk about Gary, and I got to tell you, Gary is just an institution to all West Pointers, and particularly football players, and even more particularly Black football players. Gary, along with Pat Minty and Bud Neshersini, who Bud's no longer with us, were the recruiting coaches. They did the scouting, they did recruiting. And, I was an okay athlete. I think I had more desire than I had talent. However, for me, seeing someone like Gary involved in the program gave me more impetus to go and do something harder. And Gary will tell you, the recruiting that we do at West Point, it's not telling you to come here to be a great football player. It's about coming here to become a better person, a better human being, and to be an Army officer, which Gary and I both completed our careers and retired as colonels. So Gary is just inspirational in so many ways. He continues to be to this day with he and my wife were kind of diagnosed with cancer in a similar time frame, and the great thing that Gary has done to beat that terrible disease. And I participate in our alumni association. Gary has been also very active in that accent, helping us pick distinguished grads, helping us pick our Thayer Award winners. So he's just continued to be that all-around person that we try to recruit at West Point. So Gary, welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Herman. It's an honor to be with the three of you. Each of you in your own way has had an impact on me. And hats off to Miss Iris. God bless her. And Tom, what would you like me to do? Just give a little
Yeah, talk a little about bringing your early days at West Point.
Sure.
And how
Okay.
Bill Rao and Paul Dietzel were the coaches then, and then maybe a
Gotcha.
little bit about this guy down in Alabama you thought might have some potential.
Sure. Well, I went to high school in Levittown, Pennsylvania, northeast of Philadelphia. And I was as Herman, I was a decent athlete in high school, and was looking to go to college. Didn't matter where. Of course, I began to get some interest from sports teams, about coming to the schools, getting an education, and also participating in intercollegiate athletics. Got a number of contacts from a number of schools. A gentleman named Bill Shalosky came to my high school in Levittown and talked to my assistant principal and guidance counselor. And I got called down to the assistant principal's office through the speaker. And of course, in high school, when that happens and you're called to the assistant principal's office, and on the way down there, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what did I do? I haven't done anything. And actually, Coach Shalosky was there. And that's where my journey began. He told me that they're looking at me to come to the military academy, but I needed some more work academically. So they suggested that I go to a year of prep school before I entered West Point. Went and talked to my dad about that. Dad, Army officer, and I should note, Buffalo soldier from the beginning of World War II. And of course, Mom and Dad, they said, you can go anywhere in the country you want, Gary. Wink, wink. But you're talking to the West Point coach. And so I ended up coming to West Point. And I went to the academy to get an education. And because my dad was an Army officer, I felt, well, that's not a bad thing to do. I was 17. You just kind of go with the flow. And so went to prep school, entered West Point, and I was shocked as I think all of us are when you enter on that first day. I will say, just from a historical perspective, we had over 1,000 cadets enter on day one. I can't remember the exact number. And of that number, I think there were 12 or 14 African-American young men who entered. And the class of 69, I think they ended up graduating with 8. So there was some loss there. But I want to say, and I've said this in a number of forums, that entering the academy at that time, in the midst of the civil rights era, 1966, 65 in my case, there weren't any issues that I picked up initially. There was a lot of screaming and shouting and yelling during that first summer. And people were really, getting into you. But any time that I was screamed or shouted or yelled at, I put it to the fact that I wasn't working hard enough or wasn't doing the right thing. I never thought about, the other side, if you will. There were some of my white classmates there in that summer who suggested to me that, wow, they may have been a little bit too tough on you, Gary, because they weren't as tough on us. And I had never thought of it, because I guess that's how I was brought up. My dad, again, was an Army guy. And, if things get tough, you get tougher. So it was a challenge. Academically, the entire time I was at West Point, I was challenged. It's and all of those things that I work so hard on academically, I can jokingly say that I use them every day in my life over the past 50 some years. The academy was tough. Academics were tough. The tactical side was tough. The soldier personal development part was tough, and athletics were tough also. But like any other cadet at the academy, you're going to give it your best, and that's what I tried to do. And I also say that there's no way that I could have made it through my first year at the academy or any of my succeeding years without the help of many, many people, classmates and staff and administration at the academy, who said, hey, let's see if we can make this work. I think Herman has said in the past, if you want to graduate from West Point, you can. You just need to work really hard at it, and that's what I did. So first year, freshman year, they had freshman football teams back in those days, and we did fairly well. And then we jumped into the 66 season, which I know you have some questions on a little bit later. Let me talk a little bit about the other gentleman in the fourth block on the screen here, Coach Bill Rao. He was one of the scarier people that I had ever seen in my life. He was tough. He was tough. And you talk about coming full circle. He left, and he'll talk about it. He left the academy in 66, I guess, in the spring of 66, and went with Coach Dietzel. And that was the last time I saw him until, let's say, around 2012, when my wife and I moved into Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And guess who came from Carlisle and was living in Carlisle? Coach Rao. And I'll tell the story that there was a knock on the door one day, and I was closest, so I went and opened the door. And I heard, "Steele!" And I felt like I was a plebe all over again. There was Coach Rao. And the great thing about West Point is that there's this thing called the long gray line. And the great thing about teams is that there's teamwork and there's connection. And I didn't realize it, but I've been connected with Bill Rao since 1965. And I'm a better man because of that. So know and love Coach. He's been around for a long time. We did a lot of things when we were together there in Carlisle. And I'll kind of wrap up my intro and toss back.
All right, Bill, give us some comments about the changes that were going on at West Point with Gary as the first black letterman, and then later we'll ask you to discuss about the changes in the South at South Carolina.
Well, first of all, about a year ago, Gary asked me a question. Said, "Did you recruit me because I was black?" I said, "We recruited you because you could play football." In those days, we were extremely limited on the number of people that you could bring in. We were short scholarships or appointments as such compared to the other academies. And of course, this is one reason why Coach Diesel left West Point, because we couldn't get evened up appointment-wise with the other academies. But the recruiting process we had probably in the class of '69, probably the best recruiting class that came through West Point after our class in class of '59. 10 years later, we had a pretty good football team. But Gary, looking at him, tall, skinny, he could hide behind a telephone pole. It wasn't that impressive in person, but on the football field, he was pretty darn good. And we were very familiar with the league he played in. We had a kid by the name of, a player that I played with by the name of Bill Carpenter, the Lonesome Man, from the same area, and an extremely tough young man by the name of John Carver from the Chamonix, who Gary played against as a freshman, I think, if I'm correct about.
Yes.
So we had pretty good leverage in that area, and we knew if you played in that league, you're gonna be able to play at West Point. And so it wasn't like we just picked him up. He had plenty of other opportunities, and after the year of prep school, he came in. Unfortunately, we left. Coach took the job at South Carolina, and the transition, if there was a transition at West Point, we were not aware of if it was considered that. We just recruited football players and people that of good character, and we knew we're going to be a plus. South Carolina, and we were just talking about this morning. Our doctor's office had a back entrance to the doctor's office, and we could go in the front, others could go in the back. Things were just a little bit different. However, not so much, I think, at the university and our coaching staff. We're only interested in players, and So boiling down, we recruited a lot of kids, and then you got to remember, and those the schools were integrated at the preliminary seventh grade or ninth grade. You know, when some of the schools would join, but we were talking about my wife and I, Freddie Solomon, the great Freddie Solomon. One year at Camden at senior year, academically, he was not prepared, but we tried hard to recruit him. And, but because of regulations in the AAC, Atlantic Coast Conference, we couldn't get him in. And he went elsewhere and of course had a great career in pro football. But we tried hard, recruiting, same things we did at Army. Color was not an issue. Football player was the issue. The first black player at South Carolina was a young man recruited as a baseball player. And the baseball coach, Jackie Powers, this was 2 years before Bobby Richardson came in as our coach. The old, but Jackie, he said, you know, this kid can run. He's a good athlete. Maybe we ought to try to get him out. We were throwing the ball a lot. Well, as you know, Jackie Brown ended up lettering 3 years. And actually, he got drafted in the 15th round of the pro draft. And he really didn't make it, but at least he basically he was a walk-on. The following year, we were able to get in two black athletes. One of them was Carlton Haywood, who was a running back from Georgia. And a kid by the name of Thaddeus Rowe, R-O-W-E. That was, they referred to me as Uncle Bill, I guess, but in 1971, there were 3 black football players on the team. People say, oh, that's not true. It's a fact that and of course, one was a walk-on, but he had a scholarship in baseball. So the transition at South Carolina was a little more difficult than it was at Army. But the approach at South Carolina and the same, we're looking for football players. That's it.
Yeah.
Football.
Yeah.
And that's how all this basically at South Carolina, how it happened. It was good athletes coming in, good people coming in, and that was the transition.
Yeah. And the point here is there was plenty of progress through the civil rights movement at the South. Presidents of Southern universities were pushing their coaches to integrate. Over at Clemson, Frank Howard was the other Clemson schools had recruited black athletes. Frank Howard retired without ever recruiting a black athlete after the 1969 season. So a lot of it was left up to the coaches. And in South Carolina, you had Paul Dietzel. He had experience with Gary Steele as West Point's first black player. Now he's doing the same in South Carolina. This was happening at Wake Forest, at Houston, all the other schools, all of them ahead of Alabama and Bear Bryant.
Yeah.
Alabama was the 7th of 10 SEC schools to integrate. But there were 33 of 37 major Southern programs integrated by the time Bear Bryant recruited his first black player and USC played at Legion Field. But history has a way of getting distorted. And for some odd reason, the mainstream media clings to this legend about Bear Bryant. And that's why I like having our guests on here today, because it's just not true. And the true pioneers have not received their correct place in history. And another example of that is, although Gary was the first black player, football letterman at West Point, and also a 6'9" high jumper, there were increasing numbers of black athletes. But still, it was comforting for you, Herman, to have someone who looked like you recruited him, because you knew you were going to a school where it was predominantly white. Talk about that transition for you and Gary's influence on you.
Well, may I add, the first basketball player was Casey Manning. Frank Howard recruited in '69.
Frank McGuire.
Frank McGuire, and that
Right.
That was one of the first
There you go. Another example.
basketball players in the ACC. Was cast, and actually the first black player. When we got there, we tried to recruit. Was a local kid, ended up going to Duke, and who recruited him was Tom Hart, my coach at West Point, and he flat beat us, and he turned out quite well. but and he was a local kid. Yeah, he lived not more than 15 minutes from the stadium.
Yeah,
and he came back to beat us one time too. So it wasn't because of effort. We just got
right. Right. There were plenty of schools making the effort before Alabama. Go ahead, Urban.
Oh, you brought back memories for me. I don't know about Gary, because Gary was in the military and it was a little more accommodating, I guess, when you said going to the doctor's office, couldn't go in the front door or the back door. So I remember as a youth, as a kid, when I was in single digits, having those experiences, not only for the doctor's office, restaurant, movie theater, seeing the sign saying whites only for water fountain, et cetera, et cetera. So that had certainly changed by the early 70s when I entered high school. And I'll tell the story, when I first went out for Pee Wee football, I even wanted to play quarterback then. I don't know why. And the coach said I was the only black kid on the team. And the coach said, no, get over there, you're a guard. And so for 2 weeks of Pee Wee football, I played guard. And then when I got to Coffee High School, a guy by the name of Joe Hollis, he had led us in 1964 to the state championship in Alabama. Joe went to Auburn on both the football and baseball scholarship, and he was later the coach at Arkansas State. He was head coach there for a few years. And one of my seminal moments, and it was a little bit surprising, I went out, I expected to get the same, mentally to get the same treatment I got in Pee Wee. And when I went out for the freshman team for quarterback and put the starting lineups up about, 3 weeks after practice started, and here I was, the black the starting quarterback. And I just attribute so much to Joe for doing that. I even in my mind, and I think this is so important for everybody out there, particularly parents with young kids, we need to condition our kids to think that they can do. I did not necessarily have, for the experience I had in Pee Wee, I didn't think I could do. And we have to, not with arrogance, but with confidence, have to let people know, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whether it's academia, you have to think that you can do. And from there, I went on academically, had a phenomenal career. I was also, Gary, my high school record is 6'3"3/4. I didn't quite get to 6'9". I don't even know if Gary, I was a high jumper as well. And I guess Gary was looking for that all around athlete. And Boys State ended up being president of the student council, then became the first full-time starting quarterback for the Coffee High School. And we all know about Friday Night Lights in the South. And Tom did a story on me a few years ago, and he actually found my high school coach. And I learned something from that interview that I didn't even know. Tom asked him, did he get a little heat for starting a black quarterback? And Tom, what did he tell you?
Absolutely.
And I knew none of that, and just went through. And then for me, I certainly love competition. I played 4 sports in high school, played baseball for a year, but track, basketball, and football. And I'm the youngest of 7, and 6 of the 7 finished college, with my mom, who, when my dad was killed in a car accident, hadn't even finished high school. So she went out high school, got her GED, and then went to become a licensed practical nurse at the junior college. So there was a sense of, you're going to do something. Okay.
Mhm.
And that was my sense. So for me, the sports was a means to an end. And I guess I had some natural leadership doing the student council and all those things. However, I was thinking not about, would I've loved to have gone to Alabama at that time, Tom? Of course I would have. Joe Namath, are you kidding me? And I wore his number, I wore 12. So as I went through that, and then I started getting letters from West Point, and Gary will remember this, they had a great recruiting program. Every week you got a letter, and it would talk about almost some famous person that played Army football. And you're just sitting there. And I think it takes a special kid for that to attract. And they tell you, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. It's worth it. You can do it. Come and see it. And I guess, Army was, back then there weren't a lot of games on TV, but Army did play Tennessee. I don't know if you remember that, Gary. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good outcome.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that game got some TV coverage, and that even got me more excited about it. And I just decided, my brother-in-law is seated here right now in the background, because I was living with him at the time. And I was having a lot of fun in high school and all this good stuff. And it came time, Gary, to take the PAE, physical aptitude exam. And I was like, well, I had a good night last night. I don't know. He came in, get your butt up and go and take that, go and take that. And I'm certainly glad I did that. And it was just not a moment of hesitation, but it was just seeing something. And then having Gary, I did not know Gary was the first Black letterman. Matter of fact, I only learned that when he was inducted into our Hall of Fame some 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, because it just wasn't something that he promoted in any way. But what he promoted was, this is an opportunity for you to get a great education, for you to be a contributing citizen and do great things. And you got to remember, my school was 16% Black. So I came up through an environment that I was in the minority. And what happens to you there is, you don't really, probably like Gary said at West Point, you don't really think about it. You just go out and do what you do. And were you slighted at times? Probably. But if you focus on being slighted all the time, you're not focusing on excellence. And that's what you've got to focus on. So in the end, Tom, to answer your question, Gary's presence was certainly phenomenally positive. And I'm in this environment where all the authority figures around me are white, right? So you don't really think that much about it. And he was certainly a welcoming face. However, when we got there and started practicing, Bill, I think he turned into you.
You were very aware from your days as a player how
Yes.
few Black cadets and athletes there were, and
Yes.
the importance of clearing the road for future Black athletes and cadets.
Yes. I've over the years, I've reflected on that time. And the one thing that I will openly admit is that I wasn't thinking strategically. I was thinking only tactically, which for me at the academy was all about survival. You got to make it to the next class. You got to be there on time. You got to do, you have to do well. But I did know that each year that I was there, there were a few more black cadets. And that was good. I was asked years later when I was a battalion commander by a couple of young, they were captains. They said, "How did you become a battalion commander? You must have, I mean, it's just, you must have done something special." And it was a great question, but I struggled with an answer because I said, well, basically, I got up and every day I did my job to the best of my ability and let things take care of themselves. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But at the academy, anytime I did talk to a younger cadet, white, black, whatever, it's all about effort. It's all about working hard and trying to achieve the goal. Something that I do talk about also, that I have talked about is I was back coaching in the mid 70s, 74 to 77, and at the freshman and JV level, while Mr. Bulls was there. And I remember in spring of 77, I was just about to rotate out of the academy, go on to my next duty assignment. And spring football, there was a big meeting down in the old ordnance lab. And all of the ball players were up there. And I was sitting in front, and I was kind of bored with what Coach Smith was talking about. And so I just kind of looked around the room. I looked back across the room, and there were well over 100, young football players from freshmen through juniors there. And I took that moment and I counted the number of black faces that were there in the spring of 1977. When I was coming out of my freshman year into my sophomore year, there was one black face. And just a few years later, there were 27 black faces in that room that day. And I said, we done good. The academy.
Yeah.
We done good. We've done the right thing. And we were able to get the right kids like Herman, who were going to contribute athletically, but really more importantly, they were going to contribute as cadets. And they were going to go on and serve in the military, some for 5 years, some for 20 years, some for 30 years. But it was interesting time, a changing time, but it was all good. I mean, I'm a real positive guy. It was good. I am quite sure that Herman, excuse me, had a moment or two or a time when somebody challenged him perhaps a bit stronger than they should have, perhaps because he was black. I don't know. We've never talked about that. But, hey, don't worry about it. Just keep driving on. Herman, did you ever have any issues?
Yes, I had one issue during plebe year after going back to the company, and the individual was from either Arkansas or Mississippi, and it was I'm not going to mention his name, but he had a name that would make you think, oh my gosh. And he was we used to call him a blazer, like blaze out on the plebes. And maybe I got a little extra attention, but I got to tell you, Gary, I turned that around. I remember when I was in Ranger School, for whatever reason, my name or what I did or whatever, I got just all kinds of attention. I did airborne school, I did a lot of push-ups, but in Ranger School, guess who ends up being the company commander for the mountain phase? Okay, me. Okay, so that attention, I always say, when you get lemons, you make lemonade. So I took that, and for your listeners, Gary's eyes opened a little. I mean, Ranger School to be selected as the company commander, they are looking at you, and they're getting someone that they think they can be tough on. But what's most important, that they can make it, because you're setting the example for the rest of the class doing something very arduous.
Right.
So mine has been, as I said earlier, not to look for the excuse of why I didn't do it, but look for how can I do it. And that's just, Gary, you said it a little while ago. You said, hey, I'm an optimistic fellow. I'm looking for the bright side of it.
And Herman, you reminded me, and I'll just make a brief comment. It's kind of like the situation that you mentioned during Beast Barracks. That first month or so, there was a gentleman, and I remember his name. I know his middle initial, and he leaned on me really, really, really heavily, and he was trying to get me out, but I was not going to leave. There was no way that I was going to leave, especially with him on my back.
Yeah.
So he drove me to excellence, to do better, to do more, to work harder.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think you've told that story before, Gary.
It looks like
Well,
Bill had something, Tom. Bill wanted to get
Yeah.
something in on this.
That and the story that he tells, he always had the opportunity to look across Central area and see his brother. If his brother was still standing, he was staying because he was not going to leave the family down.
That's
So
true.
we'll give his brother some credit for keeping him at West Point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were both track athletes.
Yeah.
Well, when we first scheduled this meeting, Army was on a roll. We were hoping they would still be undefeated, but we didn't know if they would be. So this is a huge Army Notre Dame game. You guys got to be excited. There hasn't been a game of this stature in a while. We're going to talk about two of them. One in 1958 with Bill Rowell, the starting center, at Notre Dame. Army wins 14-2. Notre Dame, I think, was ranked number 4 and Army number 3. So it was a titanic struggle. And then in 66, Gary Steele is a sophomore at Notre Dame. And the only two black players on the field are Gary Steele for Army and Alan Page for Notre Dame. But first, let's talk about that 58 game, Bill. Tell us about the Army Notre Dame rivalry that fans today don't understand, and about how you guys dominated that game.
Well, 57 Notre Dame game was played in Philadelphia. That game we gave away. We were up by 2 touchdowns, and all of a sudden they're lining up to kick a field goal and we're ahead 21-20. Monty Stickles from Newburgh, New York, right up the road, kicked one through. First one he ever kicked, and probably the first one, luck of the Irish. But now we're going to South Bend the next year. They had a good football team. We weren't bad. I mean, we had Bobby Anderson and we had Dawkins and we had Bill Carpenter and we had a slew of pretty good, I would say, senior players, too deep.
Yeah, let me interrupt here, Bill. Pete Dawkins, the Heisman Trophy winner.
Yes, yeah, and we had several All-Americans on the playing, but we pretty much dominated them until I snapped this. I was the center, and I put it back to the punter just a little bit high, and he had to reach up for it, and he didn't have time to punt it. Uh, However, we were fortunate, luck of the Irish. It was luck of the Army because the punter threw the ball out into the field. They called safety. It should have been 4th down on the 2-yard line for Notre Dame. At least could have been called that way. But you know, the luck of the Army. But we shut them down pretty good. We had a good team. They were very strong.
Yeah.
It's a big game. I really think Army should not win
On paper.
on paper. However, if they maintain their meanness, toughness, they have a good chance. I was really impressed with them defensively against North Texas.
Yes.
They were a pretty good football team. If you really watched them, they had talent. We just, as I say, we stuck it to them a little more than they stuck it to us. So that's going to be down to the Notre Dame game. You say, you know, you got to remember Northern Illinois beat them early in the year. We could possibly be maybe at least physically toughness will probably be the best team or the worst team that they have to play as far as smacking it. And if we out hit them, we got a chance. We can't get fancy. We just got to get a licks in, and basically that's how it was when I was playing. We didn't get fancy. You just when times got tough, the tough get a little tougher. And but I do think there is a chance if we don't do like Navy did and fumble 3 times in the first half against Notre Dame, and that got them in such a hole that they just couldn't dig it, couldn't get out. But Navy, you better watch them.
Yeah. Okay, now let's talk about the 1966 game. And this is another example of how college football lore botched by the 1960 sports media. They had no idea the progress that was going on at the time. And a flag planted on the timeline was Gary Steele as the first black West Point letterman, and Alan Page, the only black player at Notre Dame, on the field in the stadium. And at the end of the game, Notre Dame dominated. Notre Dame won the national title that year.
Yeah, they kicked our butts.
5-0. But this is a significant moment that the media would pick up today when it talks about our changing society and diversity. And everybody was oblivious to it. None of the cameramen caught it. None of the reporters wrote about it. Alan Page, the senior All-American, sees this sophomore named Gary Steele trying to block him all day long. And he came up and put his arm around you and just kind of gave you some encouragement, right, Gary? Talk about that moment.
Yes, thanks, Tom. It was a heck of a game. Like I said a minute ago, they whooped our butts. But for me, it was like a movie, a fantasy, because coming up in those years, it was all about Notre Dame, Notre Dame, Notre Dame. It was ethereal. And then we're in the stadium and it's just packed, it's crowded, you know how rabid the fans get. And you turn around and you look down the end of the field, and there on the building is what they call the touchdown Jesus. You know, so I'm going, okay, so here's where we're playing. So we had a tough game. It was tough. And I tried to block Alan Page. I blocked him. We checked the film out. We got to check the film out. but you know, they were a very physical team. I remember lining up against him, and I just remember going, "Wow, here I am, a sophomore," you know.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it was a tough game for the Army team. At the end of the game, he did come over to me. Alan Page came over to me, and he just said something along the lines of, "Hey, you know, good job. Just stick to it. You know, don't forget it. Just stay at it."
Yeah.
And for me, we're all now familiar with the Coca-Cola commercial. And who was it?
Mean Joe
Joe
Green.
Green.
Mean
Green.
Joe Green. Yeah. And that, for me, it was kind of the Coca-Cola commercial. And I'll never forget. I'm sure Judge Page, he doesn't remember that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I do. He impacted me that day. I'll never
Yeah.
forget it. And we went on that year to have an 8-2 record.
Yeah. Yeah. And the point being, again, that Alan understood the moment. We were hoping to get him on here to join us and talk, but he doesn't really like to talk about his sports career. He likes to limit it to his post-athletic career, which was a great career as a lawyer and a judge. But I also want to move on to another magnificent 1966 moment that people need to understand, because they don't understand how far people were moving on down towards progress. Army is about to go down to Tennessee, 1966. Actually, the game was at the Liberty Bowl in Memphis. And Warren McVay, when he played in Houston, had suffered terrible abuse when Houston played Ole Miss at the Liberty Bowl. And a team captain came up to Gary and said, "Had a little advice for you about going down to the South." A guy named Townsend Clark that ended up being a general. And when people hear this story that Gary's going to tell us, you can understand what kind of a leader Townsend Clark was. Take it away, Gary.
Yeah. Again, sophomore year, reasonably early, moving towards mid-season. And I get the word near the end of practice, "Hey, team captain wants to see you at his locker after practice." I'm quaking in my boots. Again, like going to the assistant principal so many years earlier. What have I done? And I went over and talked to him. And he said to me, I guess it may have been Tuesday of the week, and we were going down for a Saturday game. He said, I just want you to understand, we're going to Tennessee, south of the Mason-Dixon line. We hadn't played in the South up to that time. And he said, we don't know what the reactions are going to be like in the stadium or on the field. But Gary, I just want you to know that you are a starting member on this Army football team, and we are together. It's us. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that it was going to be in the southern area until he mentioned it, and then the rest of the week it was on my mind. But we went down, and honestly, I can remember it like it was yesterday. My antenna were up. I was, kind of just looking around, making sure that everything was on the up and up. And we played. They beat us too. We played the game, and there was one play when I was throwing a pass. It was close to the edge, out of bounds, and me and the defender, we rolled out of bounds, and the stadium was really tight, and rolled up against the cement wall right where the fans were. And we picked ourselves up, and at that instant I said, "Ooh, I wonder if," but nothing happened. and and I ran back and I got into the huddle and the game went on. But that was really honestly, the entire time that I was an athlete at the academy, the only time that I ever thought, oh, is something going to happen because of where we are and the people that are around us.
Yeah.
But again, my focus pretty much all my life has always been, okay, whatever it is, let's get it done, and don't worry about the chaff that's on the side. And I would say to any young man or woman who's involved in sports in any way, focus, because that's the thing that's going to get you through. Don't let the noise on the side bother you. Focus on what it is. If it's a sporting event, if it's in the classroom in high school or in college, or if it's in the army or in the corporate world, focus.
Yeah, and the point there being that nothing happened. There was
Correct.
no shock in 1970 when USC showed up at Alabama with all these black players. It had been going on throughout the 1960s in the South. But this myth has taken hold, and it's tough to get rid of it. But Herman, I want you to comment. You know, you're a retired colonel, one of the top executives in America at JALL. You're in the Alabama Business Hall of Fame. The leadership, not only from West Point, but maybe from Townsend Clark as an individual, to do that for Gary in 1966.
Well, you know, life is about leadership. And I define leadership as the ability to influence a group to accomplish a common goal. So leaders have vision, leaders have empathy, leaders have compassion, and leaders also have standards. And I think, and the point Gary and I made where we thought we may have been picked out for something, there's a possibility when it's half full that that individual picked you out because they thought you had potential. And I know both of you as coaches know that. Okay. And I did that when I coached my kids, you know, Pee Wee and Little League teams. You know, the people that you think have potential are the ones that you challenge. And I can tell you that the lessons of sports are so applicable in the civilian world, in the corporate world that I'm serving in. And I don't often talk about this, and Tom, you may not even be aware of it. Gary may be. However, a couple of weeks ago, I was selected, the little skinny kid that Gary saw down in Florence, Alabama, as the public company corporate director of the year. You know, there are
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
20,000 people who could have been selected. And I understand there's some luck involved in these things when it comes down to, you know, kind of like winning the Heisman Trophy or getting into the West Point Hall of Fame, like my good friend here is. However, as I look back on what is it that motivated you to do the things that you do, and I think it's leadership. And I go back to one company that I'm chairman of now that's in the battery energy service space, which is very technically proficient. And they asked me to be on their board. And then before I know it, they asked me to be chairman. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not an expert in this area. And the response, and something I share particularly with younger people now, was we're not looking for you for your technical expertise. We're looking for you for your leadership. So you learn that in sports because you learn that you don't always win. It doesn't always go right. You've got to always have a contingency plan. And the most important one is what? You've got to collaborate with others to have success.
Okay, well, let's wrap up. I want to add one more timing comment. John Robinson, the great USC coach, College Football Hall of Fame, died yesterday. And again, I'm always trying to tell the true story of college football integration, but that story extends through Jimmy Ray into the NFL. Jimmy Ray was the quarterback for Michigan State, the South's first black quarterback to win a national title on that 1966 team that played Notre Dame, and also in 65 and won the national title. And then Jimmy made a big mark in the NFL on black coaches. He was a mentor to many black coaches. And one reason was he joined the NFL as an assistant coach. First, Duffy Daugherty gave him a start at Michigan State in 72. And then he went on to the NFL in 1977. But in 1983, John Robinson made him only the second black coordinator in the NFL history. 1983. He was their offensive coordinator. That gave Jimmy Ray a platform where since then he has influenced so many young black coaches who've come into the NFL. And it's a platform that Jimmy Ray doesn't get enough recognition for. And also, I put on Twitter, people are going to read a lot of glowing obituaries about John Robinson. What they're not going to read was this important role he did elevating Jimmy Ray in 1983 and how Jimmy Ray took advantage of that and shared his opportunity with so many black coaches in the future. So I wanted to make sure I made that point too, because it's the story the mainstream media fails to understand. Let's get some final comments from all three of you guys. Gary, you want to go first, commenting about what Bill meant to
Sure.
you, and then Bill, you'll follow.
Yes. I've got so many stories I can tell about Coach Rao. But one that was especially meaningful to me was a few years ago at West Point in the summer. There is a tradition where graduates can march back from a summer training engagement, march back to the academy from Lake Frederick. I did, and that's what, 12, 14 miles, Herman?
Yes.
I chose not to do that because of my problems with my knees. I just did it when they were on post. So I got my mile or two in. But after we kind of cleaned up, there was a gentleman walking in front of me, and he was older than me, but I looked at him from behind and I knew he was a jock. I could tell. And so I went up, I introduced myself, and he was a class of 58 or 59. I cannot remember his name. I said, well, gosh, I have a good friend who was a coach when I was a young a freshman here. His name, and he played football. His name was Bill Rao.
Mhm.
And this guy stopped and he looked at me and he said, Bill Rao. He says, I'll tell you what, we had a great football team. We had Anderson, Dawkins, we had all of these studs. The toughest man on the Army football team, Bill Rao. So I let everybody who's listening or watching know that. The toughest man in the Army football team was Bill Rao. And again, going back to the circle of life, we connected in 1965, and years later, we ended up reconnecting. And it's because of men like Bill Rao that I'm here and able to speak to you all today.
Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead.
waving, I'm passing a wave on from Butch for you, for you, Gary, and our best to Mona, and shower hello for us.
Right, I sure will.
And it's been a good run. Great 10 years in Carlisle with the Steels. And you have a place to stay whenever time you venture back.
Yes, sir.
And thanks for everybody for letting me participate in this program. It was fun. Yeah.
Okay, as usual, Herman's going to bring us home. Herman, did you learn a little bit more about how you ended up there
Yeah.
through Gary, through Bill?
Well, I just, and Gary's very aware of this. I'm a connector. I think most of my success in life has not come from anything I've tried to do. However, I try to help others by connecting and 1 and 1 equals 3. And Bill, it's certainly, obviously, I know that team, Pete Dawkins, I know him, spent a lot of time with him in academy events, and to meet another member of that team and understand the lineage, because believe it or not, maybe I'm not sitting here right now if it's not for you. And each of us, as we proceed in our careers, we have to understand the intended and unintended consequences that result in the impact that we have on other people. And that's just something, to be honest with you, for me, that has just come to bear in the last 4 or 5 years. Because I'm out there I'm just jugging and jiving, trying to make it every day, so to speak. And as we get to the point, and you gentlemen are a little older than I am, and you probably already knew this, just not necessarily thinking about your legacy from an egotistical perspective, but thinking about your legacy in terms of what am I doing for the next generation. And I want to tell both of you gentlemen that the foundation that you have made, not only for West Point, not only for the Army football team, for our nation, is admirable. And I consider it a pleasure to be here with you. And for my co-host, Tom, he and I met through one of my classmates. He needed a quote, and I was his third choice because the superintendent couldn't do it, and he needed an Army football player to talk about it. What a fortuitous incident. And I learned so much every year. And Tom, just your commitment to journalism, and journalism to the extent of seeking and transmitting to the public the truth, is something that I really, really, really admire about you and your passion for it. So it's a pleasure to be your co-host. And for everyone, I want to just say again, I know it's past Veterans Day, but for all the veterans out there, we're thinking about you and continue to do great things for our nation.
Thank you, Herman. Yeah, there is a chapter in my book, The Right Thing to Do, The True Pioneers of College Football Integration in the 1960s, on Gary Steele and his time at Army West Point. And we are in the fundraising stage for a documentary, and Gary's story needs to be a part of that too. Hopefully we can come up with the funds for it. But for now, share this video. Thanks for watching. Share this video with any of your friends far and wide. And thanks for watching.